Donc après cette fausse courte pause qui a finalement été une longue pause, on va reprendre avec Christine Adongo qui va nous parler une fois de plus des sociétés pastorales et notamment des sources thermales, donc pour faire le lien avec la présentation précédente. On vous écoute, merci.
Thank you very much. My presentation is in English, but I tried to make it the PowerPoint in French. So it's a collaborative work. It's a collaborative work with Benoit and Yves, who is not here. I think I saw Benoit. And the focus is mostly social anthropology, on social anthropology. So you will see a difference between what you've been listening to since morning and my presentation. So today what I would like to share with you is the focus on 6 themes. The first is that what is geothermal industrial production in Kenya? How is it done? Who does it? Where is it concentrated? At what scale? And secondly, why today we are talking about geothermal when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, hydropower was the major mode of production of electricity. And a dimension of geothermal electricity in Kenya that I would like to highlight is its labeling or its mentioning as a green source of energy. Does it make a difference? Do we need energy or do we need green energy? Or do we just want energy? It doesn't make a difference. And what does the production of geothermal as a mode of electricity production represent for countries such as Kenya, who would like to be second world by 2030, or what does geothermal production has to do with it? On the flip side of the production of geothermal, I also would like to focus on other users of the same landscape as geothermal production. So in this case, the communities that inhabit the same landscape as the geothermal, how do they interact with these developments? Is there harmony between them? Is there some sort of trade-off between geothermal and the local societies? What are the implications to the local societies? And lastly, is there an alternative? If we find that geothermal maybe elicits some or needs some form of improvement, what kind of solutions, what kind of propositions could we propose to be able to have a sustainable kind of energy? So initially, from around the 50s, geothermal was very pessimistic form of energy because some people felt like it was too expensive to produce, there wasn't enough of it, people didn't really understand what it was. At some point, there was a thought that geothermal is actually water in gaseous state, so it has to be managed by the Ministry of Water. Or other people thought geothermal comes from geological resources, so it's a mineral, so has to be in the domain of mines and resources. Surprisingly, it wasn't thought of as green energy or energy under the domain of the energy department. But from around 1990, when there was the production of the first well that was really successful, there started to be reforms, policy reforms to be able to produce geothermal, and that was when KenGen, the Kenya Electricity Generation Company, was formed to be able to now take control of the production of geothermal. But this again changes from 2008 to 2021, when geothermal electricity does not just become geothermal, but it is labeled renewable energy, a green source of energy, a sustainable energy, a cost-effective energy, in line with the climate change discourse, looking at its ability to fight against climate change in terms of carbon emissions reductions. So geothermal, again, takes a different role. So we see many policies that specifically target geothermal implementation as a green energy and not just as an energy as hydro and others. And one of them is the renewable energy feed-in tariff that encourages companies and individual power producers to source for geothermal. It means they already have a market even before they realize the production of geothermal. So that is one of them. So currently, the production of geothermal electricity is concentrated in Olkaria, this zone. It's called the Greater Olkaria Geothermal Area. Although all along the Kenyan Rift has been earmarked as a potential region for geothermal exploration, some areas like around Lake Bogoria, Magadi have already started activities, but no actual production is happening. So to be able to realize the 10,000 megawatts that Kenya is talking about, I think to be the 6th geothermal energy producer in the world, they intend to produce geothermal energy all along the rift. But what is peculiar about this zone also is that it is inhabited by pastoral communities who are also dependent on natural resources. So up to date, 50% of Kenyan electricity comes from geothermal sources. So this shows how important geothermal has risen in only a few years and how much more development is about to happen. But why geothermal? A few years ago, we were talking about hydroelectric power. The main reason or the main justification to accelerate the production of geothermal is majorly climatic. Because when we have severe droughts, very irregular or very unreliable weather conditions, hydroelectric power is really unreliable. So there have been massive losses in both industry, especially in small and medium enterprises and so on. So geothermal is looked as something that is more viable, something that is more stable, something that will be available forever, they say, which is also subject to discussion. Nobody knows what is the renewability of geothermal. Is it because it will continue to exist indefinitely, or is it because it is, I mean, it's really unknown. So the other one is its ability to attenuate climate change. We are told that geothermal is renewable and then it's clean, which is also subject to debate, but this is the major discourse that drives geothermal. And I think it is majorly linked with the funding available for green projects, because in what has been called climate justice that avails more funding to southern countries or countries that are seen as being the sufferers of climate change impacts and not the causers of climate change, for adaptation, for attenuation, for building renewable projects, for trading in carbon. So the availability of this kind of funding has, in my opinion, necessitated this kind of labeling and this kind of acceleration for geothermal production. So it was expected that with the production of geothermal electricity, the cost would reduce because the rate of electricity access in Kenya is actually, especially for the rural populations, it's still less than 30%, and that is huge. So with geothermal, it was thought that the electricity cost would decline. There would be more electricity to the grid, and therefore that would translate to the population having access to electricity, which is inverse of what is happening currently. The figures have remained relatively the same. The cost of electricity has continued to increase, so we don't see where geothermal really has eased things, apart from the fact that it is meant for the middle class and not necessarily for the rural and the poor at first. And one other thing is that it would provide employment to people, while the reality is that the people on whose lands the geothermal is being produced do not need employment in the industrial setup. They have a different kind of lifestyle depending on other things. And then they are told that geothermal exploration is highly technical and they do not have the necessary skills to be able to be employed. So it's just one of those things being thrown around. You know, you'll get jobs, you'll have green jobs, you'll have more income, you'll have better livelihoods because of geothermal. So what interests me, especially with the implementation of geothermal energy, is its labeling as a green form of energy. But is it really green? What makes it green? Is it because we are told renewable energy is also green energy, or because it has no significant negative implications on the environment, which is wrong? Okay, it may be saving so much carbon, trading in carbon, which benefits, which lets other people be able to pollute wherever they are. But what does it mean at the local level? What we see is that geothermal, the conceptualization and the implementation of geothermal is based on global discourses and national goals rather than local needs. And this is where my interest comes in. So we are told geothermal is saving so much carbon every year. It is a source of finance, unlike the loans that we get from the EU or from the US. No, this is a different kind of thing that we don't have to pay for. What is forgotten is that the implementation of these projects do not occur in space. They occur on landscapes. Landscapes which even during exploration, during the advancement of geothermal, had meanings, different kind of meanings to what the national government thinks or the global discourses think. They had meanings, they had people, they had uses. So, as I said, for example, in Olkaria, there's one clan of Maasai that inhabit the Olkaria area, and these are called the Kikunyuki, who practice pastoralism as their base of subsistence. And that means that they do not view geothermal as an extractive as the industries do. They look at the landscape as a source of survival because they need pasture for the livestock, they need water for the livestock. They have cultural spaces and cultural and historical sites that are significant to them. So for them, the landscape has a different sort of meaning, not necessarily in terms of GDP or not necessarily in terms of economic benefits as in the industry, but some other importance that others overlook that we do not really understand. There are different medicinal plants that they use. Most of them don't go to the hospital because they have the medicinal plants that they use from the landscape. There are different fauna and flora, there are archaeological resources, and also tourism. One of these sites is this rock. It's a massive rock, more than 100 meters in height. So when geologists come, they look at some marvelous geological feature, you know. But to the locals, it's not just a marvelous geological feature that has no meaning. It is a very important prayer site for dedicating children to Enkai, for blessings. And not only that, there's a whole mythology around this rock that actually dictates the behavior and the relationship between the Maasai and their livestock and the environment that is being changed as a result of the incoming of geothermal sources. There are ochre sites like this, red and white ochre, that the Maasai use during ceremonies. But what you see, that's the steam, it's a geothermal source. What you see is that they occur in relation to geothermal sites. So you find that when the company comes, they put their wells on these kind of, They put their wells on these kind of sites. And that means the site is not accessible anymore for ochre, for spiritual purposes, and so on. There's a photo. This is a gorge called Orbatata. It looks like just another geological formation, but it is actually a very significant transhumance path that links the Maasai of Olkaria and the Maasai of Kenya. So they would move across this gorge depending on the rainy season or the dry season and the wet season grazing areas. And inside there are very, very many cultural areas and even sites that are meant for young animals, sites that are meant for the springs that are really spiritual and so on. So the difference in the view of the same landscape. Here we have the same landscape. We have two stakeholders of the landscape with completely different views of the landscape. One really depends on it for survival because they need the natural resource, looking at the landscape as a resource. And the other one, looking at it as an opportunity for national development or for national growth, or to be able to contribute globally to the climate change discourse. So because of these antagonisms, there has been and there is still distributive conflict between the local communities and the industries and even at the national level as well. But what kind of conflicts do we see? One of the things is that as much as electricity is being produced from these landscapes, the people inhabiting the landscape have no electricity. So there's electricity coming from the land, but the inhabitants are in the dark. They have no electricity. It's because it is meant for the middle class in Nairobi, in big cities, and so on, but there is no vision about what about these people in this, what do they need? Is there a way we can collaborate? Is there a way we can see how to include them in in our production of electricity. So one of the implications has been the modification and the utilization of the land from pastoral landscapes to geothermal energy landscapes. And this has significantly changed the meaning of the land. For example, there's an exercise we had with the children, with young primary school children, about what their landscape looks like, to draw what they look like. And many of them were drawing that as part of their landscapes, while the older ones were drawing this. And when we asked them, okay, what would you like to do when you grow up, they would say, I would like to be employed in the geothermal industry, because they understood that this is the future. It is no longer possible to raise livestock. It is no longer possible to live in the way that they used to. It is as if the company does it intentionally to be able to have subjects for their cheap labor for the industries. So from pastoral societies to communities that are dependent on the geothermal industry. Then you see pipes like this. This is just one small portion of it, but throughout the landscape, it's very impressive. As soon as you arrive, you see pipes connected everywhere and so on. And this has had really a different perception of and use of the landscape. People have had to be expelled from their villages. For example, these ones were initially living in the village with the livestock, with this kind of livelihood, but then they had to be moved to a new site called Rapland into this kind of housing. So for the World Bank, who funded this project, they would look at these two photos and say, okay, look, they live in better houses. It means their conditions of living have improved. Look at where they used to live before, but now they have stable housing, they have a two-bedroomed house. But what they fail to tell us, or what they fail to show, is that you see the fence that is surrounding this house. The Maasai did not live like that, because with this kind of cattle, you would not have that number of livestock in a small fence like that. And that not only has implications on the livelihood, but also socially. They would have the round manyatas, but now everyone else is fenced off in their individual houses, which really makes it a different kind of setting in terms of social relations and even political organization of the Maasai. For example, this man, the owner of this house, he has 2 wives and 10 children. And this house has 2 bedrooms. So the World Bank does not tell us that this is a better condition of living. In Maasai culture, he does not have to share the house with his wives. He would build his own manyata separately with resources from the land. He does not need 2 million to build this house. So definitely, and it's also clear that he is not able to keep the livestock that he used to keep. So what does he do? He looks for employment at the geothermal industry, but he is not able to get that because he is not qualified. He has no education to be able to access to this highly technical employment. He could be a watchman, for example, which is also casual, and that means his condition of living has deteriorated, even though he didn't have an employment, what we think we need. He didn't need an employment, he just needed to stay where he is. So what we see is that more and more geothermal implementation, as much as they tell us, they give the locals jobs and so, it has exacerbated poverty among the inhabitants of the land. You find there are needs in this kind of house that they didn't need in this one. For example, they need to have curtains, they need to have furniture, they don't need that. So what do? They sell the livestock to be able to finance a new sort of lifestyle. There's pollution. Many sources in the gorge have been polluted by brine, by effluents from geothermal sources. Although it's denied, we carried out an analysis of some of the sources within the gorge, and the level of arsenic was like 100 times higher than what it should be, but it's from the effluents from the geothermal. Nobody talks about that. Some of the sources are not utilizable anymore because when the livestock drink this kind they drink from these water sources, they die. So the Maasai keep away from these sources, whereas there are sources that they would use in the past. There is air pollution. There is...
I beg your pardon, it's time to give your conclusion, please.
Yes, it's a conclusion. So, to conclude, what is the alternative? What kind of energy production, what kind of socialized energy would we produce to be able to solve the problem that we are experiencing or we are seeing with the geothermal? Is there a different way to do the things? Is there a way to descale the things so that energy is not just for the middle class, but it's for all the levels of classes? It means for the locals. And how can we ensure that there is a balance between national goals, global discourses, and local subsistence? Because the locals are also people, they need to survive as well. So how do we do that? That is the challenge we are trying to respond to with a new project that Benoit has. How do we respond to this kind of challenge? Because as much as geothermal is important at the national level, which is undeniable, it is also important that people feel part of the process and that people also benefit, the inhabitants also benefit from, to be able to live their lives as they did, and not to be looked at as a trade-off between national goals and local implications. What solutions can we come up with? Thank you.